Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the next edition of Ami Sites. I'm Ami Kassar, your host, along with my co-host, Lynn Ozer, aka SBA Queen. Today, super excited to have a pretty new friend of mine. We met in the tree houses at the unconference. Thierry is calling all the way in from Canada. I thought he was fascinating when I met him, had a fascinating story to share, and I thought he'd be a great guest to have on Ami Sites. So, Chris, thank you for sharing some of your time with us today, and welcome to the show.
Hey, no, thanks for having me, Amy and Lynn. Really appreciate being on.
Glad to see you. And
Lynn always has her favorite first question.
I want to know my favorite first question. When did that entrepreneurial bug bite you?
Well, it was kind of a little bit of an accident. I mean, I grew up. I wanted to be in computers. Back in the 90s, this thing called the internet, the interweb was coming of age, and I saw all these people getting rich, and so I got into this program called the Management Information Systems. It was kind of like a hybrid business computer science program they had at university, and in that I just, I was pretty decent at coding. I was understood the tech very well. I took intro to accounting and all that kind of fun stuff. And I thought, oh, I'd get a job, graduating in 1999, I'd get a job somewhere doing e-commerce or web or something, right? And it just so happened that I ended up getting an opportunity to work for a guy in YPO, and he had about 150 employees, and I could spell HTML, so I became his web guy, at the ripe age of 21. And about a year into this, I built his e-commerce site, and I, hired a couple of developers, and he introduced me to that whole world of EO, YPO, and I know a guy kind of thing, and how easy it was for him to connect and do business. And so one of the things that I realized is, as he was introducing me all around to his friends, and some of those friends became my customers, he said, oh, we have to come up with a business, we have to create a business around this. So I was getting interested to go to California and do my, go to the mecca of web back in the day. This was again 1999, and he said, no, we should form a business together, and that's kind of how it started. It was like being incubated, if you will. Before incubators were the thing and the rage, I got incubated in a YPO business, and I like to say I was kind of like this fungus growing in the corner of his office. It just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and we were doing e-commerce sites in the early days of e-commerce, and mainly part of that was, we'd started off with the idea that we'd go raise $5 million, as one does, or as one did back in the pre-dot-com era, and ultimately, we missed the window. And in missing the window, it kind of forces a lot of things on you. When you don't raise the money you think you're going to raise, and all of a sudden, you want to keep things going, and you have employees, and it wasn't. I had a couple of employees. It wasn't like I had a huge, but I had responsibilities to pay salaries, and I was invested in this business. And now it was like, all right, now I have to learn how to sell. I now literally cannot rely on my partner to just feed me money in business. I needed to go out and sell, and that pivot really changed everything. So I went from a guy who was semi-technical and could do project management and do and do all the wonderful presentations, but really it forced me to become a professional salesperson, an entrepreneur, because no money, no company. So that sort of kicks you, pushes you into reality, because at the end of the day, you can pretend, and a lot of us entrepreneurs are very good at pretending and selling ourselves. But when you looked in the bank account, and the bank account hadn't moved or was being drained every 2 weeks because of payroll. Anyway, that was kind of the initial part of the business. And what the initial idea that I had, which I was going to raise the money for, literally went bye-bye, ciao, and I had to pivot to being a web consultant. And that's kind of how that started. And and I grew that up to a few $1 million in revenue. And ultimately during the course of that, I discovered another idea on how to make money. And I took that money from one side and put it into the other side. And anyway, I know it's a long answer to the question, but that's how I got here.
No. But you did mention pivoting, and people have to pivot for lots of different reasons. And your idea became obsolete, and you had to pivot. So that was great. And you pivoted to web design. When you did that, were you doing that alone, or were you able to keep your
I
employees?
was able to keep,
Or
yeah, like I part of that pressure, like, pressure makes diamonds. That was kind of it. Like I never, I was living at home, so it was fantastic. My fridge was full, well, everything was covered. I was driving
yeah,
1989 Tercel, which could barely get up a slight hill, so my expenses were pretty low, and so, you know, I tell this when I talk to university kids all the time. If you're in that environment where you're living at home and you're saving money, and if you don't take the opportunity to put yourself out there or risk, it's tougher and tougher and tougher as you get older, and you
absolutely.
get the car, and all of a sudden you want to have a BMW, and all these expenses start rolling up. It becomes very difficult. But anyway, we're in a brand new age for entrepreneurship as far as I'm concerned with AI. So delve into that, but
No, no,
it
that's really true.
yeah, but
So
pivoting was well, yeah, I did multiple pivots during, well, multiple significant pivots, and each time I like to say it was like a recession that sort of kicked me in the butt to be able to do this. Like my initial idea didn't quite work out, but then the .com thing came around, .com crash came around and forced me to just consult and do what I refer to my early days of my business as AFM, anything for money. And so there's a lot of these acronyms that I created over the 20 years or 25 years I've been in business, and they were all kind of like, and again, as I coach and I talk to other people, it's okay. Like, product market fit is really about testing your hypothesis for the business versus and figuring out what the market is willing to pay for, right? And everyone has ego. Everyone is like, I'd love my ideas to be the greatest that ever, but the only time that I felt that my ideas actually work is when somebody's willing to pay for them, right? If nobody's willing to pay for my ideas or product or whatever, then it's just a lot of hot air, right? And so, it's okay to test and fail, test and fail, test and fail, but when you succeed a little bit, okay, get better and better and better. And that's ultimately what happened with us, is we started to find these little niche markets or opportunities or things that lit up. And one of the ideas that we came up with, in the early days of the company, was this idea that, a lot of telecom bills were confusing. People didn't understand them, and that they were being overpaid, and the telcos were charging for services that weren't being used at large corporations. And sort of the lights went on about how do we build something that could fix that and automate that, and that became Simple, which is the company that ultimately allowed me to go off into early retirement and grow the business and be on all those wonderful lists that people talk about.
Let's talk about that experience of building that company and
yeah,
that evolution and the
Yeah.
exit and all that.
So classic. So as I was I built my consulting business to generate a few $1,000,000 a year. Had me about 25 employees doing that, and it was always a hunt, and you always a struggle to find the new customer. Right? We would build these very intricate, customized, web systems that would, and so be finding these large companies, and my name was getting passed around as somebody who could build and fix and stitch this together. And it was just stressful because you would see the revenue come up, and then all of a sudden you'd notice a few months down the road that if that revenue was not there anymore. So I always wanted this recurring revenue. Today we call that SaaS. I just wanted to have some sustainability on the revenue so that I wouldn't collapse. So we started investing, one little bit at a time into this telecom expense management platform, which became Simple. And it was basically like, okay, how much money can I make here so I can afford one person, two person, two, three people, four people, and that became my funding. Right. So that was the engine that allowed me to fund the burn of putting a SaaS product together, because SaaS, for the most part, is a big burn. Right. You have to build it before, and then demo it before, and then rent it out. So instead of like the software where we're consulting and selling it for big dollars and getting those dollars in early and then charging maybe a 15% maintenance fee every month, we doing the exact opposite. And just like I said before, with a good recession, never waste a good recession. The financial crisis hit in 2007, 2008, and a lot of the money that had been gone into just web development projects, or at least the projects that we were doing, kind of dried up. But at the same time, saving money was really cool. So we just happened to have at that time a product to allow companies to save money. And so all of a sudden, within 2 years of having a few $1,000,000 down to like $400,000 in revenue, I had the exact opposite happen with my expense management software. So for a period of like 2 or 3 years, that we had very, very small growth. But what's happening in the business was it was completely turning upside down. We went from having that one time heavy reliance on one time revenue with little recurring to having a company that was almost entirely based on recurring revenue. And so the valuation of the business obviously took off. We were in the right space, and it was pretty clear to me that it was the time to hit the gas on Simple, and I let that other business slowly just wean down, and the people just shifted over as needed. So it was my source of people, and even when I sold the business, I still had like a trickle of revenue coming from those old days, but all the revenue was recurring, coming from expense management.
So when did you have your exit, and how did that all work and look?
Yeah, so the exit was in 2019, in August of 2019, and I remember
Perfect timing.
perfect timing. Yeah, it was my partner. So my partner, my slash YPO, mentor slash partner, who was a CPA or an accountant by trade, ex McKinsey, had really sharp eye for stuff, and he was about almost 17, 18 years older than me, and he had sort of an eye for, and he had multiple exits, so he had sort of an eye for, okay, maybe it's time, and I hadn't taken on any significant money out of the business to that point. It was always, growth and go, and we did a management retreat, call it like that, or an owner's retreat in Spain, and we got pampered, and we were talking and about, okay, maybe it's time to look for, take some chips off the table, so to speak. And because we had been stalked, I would call it stalked, by a number of private equity, growth equity people. We weren't going to be a rocket ship. We were kind of growing by about 30% organically every year, and which was great, and we're profitable, no debt. So we had a lot of the good numbers that those kind of companies like.
Did you say no debt?
No debt, no. Yeah, no debt. There was no investment because we missed the boat. We didn't take any of the $5 million. It was just me and my partner.
That.
So
Yeah.
plus some employee options that we had given out over time, and we'd given out anyway. We always planned to give out 10%, and of course, in tech businesses, you drag that as long as humanly possible. So I think when we sold, I think we gave away something like 8%, something like that, 8.5 or whatever, and it was, but the process of selling was like, all right, let's, he was getting older. He wanted to start exiting his stuff, and I was 41, so it wasn't like I was, dying to retire or anything. But certainly, we go through the process of figuring out what your value is. We'd figured out more or less what the market was for what we were doing. And the multiples we got were right bang on in terms of what we were expecting. They valued our recurring, and they valued our one-time revenue, and they blended it together, and that's what we sold for. And a couple of things at the bitter end that we were able to negotiate, but ultimately it went well. We got our money, and I got early retirement, I guess. And then
did your employees become employees of the new company?
Yes, yeah. So that in and of it, in that process, and I'd only done this one thing. We were very clean in terms of books. We had our accounting done by Deloitte. We were already, for 5 years, we had been ready to potentially sell or get an investment. It was really run well.
Mm-hmm.
But the funny thing is even as we were doing this, of course, even as it was clean and digital, we still ended up spending quite a significant amount of money with the lawyers and the accountants, and which led me to create another business called Liquid Docs, but I'll get into that later. But the employees, yeah, I tried to make sure that they all stayed. I wrote letters even when I left. After my transition, I wrote a very long plan of who should be kept and who should be option, who should they try and keep, and so on and so forth. It doesn't, unfortunately, the day, the second you are no longer in control of your company, you are no longer in control of your company. So, which
That's
I
right.
think Yeah. So there's a whole process there, which I don't want to get into, but it's emotional
It's
for
a
a
grieving.
founder.
It's
Yeah.
grieving.
When we had a great culture, we were winning awards for that. Like I knew where the kitchen, every inch of the office, like, installing the Italian cafeteria that we had, and the playroom, like we had a warehouse effectively as an office, and we converted it to, office space plus a back room playroom with, the pool table and 3,000 square foot of playroom, so the culture was great, and to this day, I still have I still have people getting together as alumni. This is years after the fact.
How many employees were there?
I think we're about 130-ish, I guess. We had some intern. I don't remember the exact count, but somewhere in there, 130. Yeah, and they were
So
all like half the company was technical, was like developers and, QA, and most of them were based in Montreal, where our head office was. And then there were, the remaining people who had some customer service and people like that around the business, and they were kind of scattered out through North America. So I had some employees in the US and other cities in Canada. We had 24 languages spoken and 32 nationalities.
wow, that's
How's the
Which is
company?
which
nice.
is really one of the craziest
Has,
things, right?
has that company survived and grown and didn't
Yeah,
fine?
it's still surviving. I just got a ping on LinkedIn about an event they just did. So yeah, so it's still going. I mean, some of the people have definitely changed. I mean, it's been what, 7 years now, so it's crazy to think that it's been that long. But I'm still like, it's
What
your
are
baby.
you doing?
What am I doing? Sorry, what am I
Now
doing?
it's going to get interesting, Lynn. Are you ready?
This is a loaded question, Lynn. That's a
We're just getting to the fun part. Okay.
Well, I
Well, what
want to
happened
hear
is,
it.
of course, after the 6 months, so what ended up happening is I was starting to figure out that I was not going to really be part of the long-term plan, and nor did I want to be. I think it wasn't, not my cup of tea. I realized as an entrepreneur, I'm probably unemployable at this point. I've been running a business for 25 years and being at the top. Doesn't mean I can't work with people. I love working with competent people, and that would be the air quotes there, competent people. But ultimately, yeah, I went right into starting new stuff, and I was planning. So I created my whole, all that family structure that typically happens when you get a lotto check. I hadn't set up a lot of that stuff. I'd sort of like pushed it off, and so I had no more excuses. So I'd set that up, and then from there, I did some angel investing, and then, people were calling me for, hey, do you want to do this, and I remember my partner had this great thing where he would take these kids and sort of, bring them along and coach them, and then be able to sort of be there. And that was kind of my idea. And that's more or less what I've tried to do is be the guy with a little bit of money and a lot of experience, and help some of these younger entrepreneurs who've still got the fire and the drive, and a lot more drive. Like, nothing drives you to succeed more was when you're broke, right? And so, those kind of, that willingness to run through a wall is what I had. It's tougher to replicate, at least, but I'm getting up in the morning. I'm taking calls on weekends. I'm doing all of that stuff. Not getting paid for it yet. It's all equity, but it's a fun way of working again, because I'm not as stressed as I was, but I
So
enjoy it.
you help them to execute. You know, you give
Yeah.
the advice and then they do the execution. Is what I'm
So you're
saying.
kind of like angel investing in a way. Is that a first thing?
Yeah, I'm doing some angel investing. I'm not trying to be the mega investor. I am a fractional CEO of two businesses, and then I'm on advisory boards and things like that, and I'm in part of the Y Combinator network, and a few other things. But my two primary businesses are quite different. One is Liquid Docs, and so I built that really out of a personal experience, just dealing with the accountants and lawyers that I had to deal with. And I partnered up with a guy who's got a finance background, and he's done taking companies public, and so he has an understanding of all the financial methodology to take a company and put them on NASDAQ or put them on the Canadian Venture Exchange, etc. And so we were looking at building a technology that would help, you know, get 100% accuracy on your data, sorry, your your due diligence, but basically your data room, right? Is the word I was looking for there. But basic and not like 99.99, because if you get to 99.99, you still have to review it. So there's still, so what we ended up doing there is we built a technology that really puts all the information into a proper relational database, which is kind of scary. Uses some AI, but uses all these different techniques that we built out, and that's pretty cool. And then we've been able to use that technology for other things. So we're in the process of building like a CRM that uses that same technology. We'll be launching it pretty soon. We're demoing it to some of our investors right now. And then the other business is something that I got involved with some universities here, and one of them is McGill University. They have this thing called the McGill Innovation Fund, and they have dinners and all that kind of stuff, and you meet people, and they get into a lot of health tech and biotech stuff, which isn't exactly my specialty, but reading a balance sheet, understanding how to go to market, it tends to be. And so we've built we're in the process of raising money. I built a website using Claude to go do this. It was a fantastic experience. And now we're negotiating with a manufacturer in Taiwan to help us build these contact lenses with a special technology that we've been able to adapt that makes the contact lens significantly more comfortable. So the term they call is wettability, and that's a whole other domain. But I can do a presentation and not mention AI in any of that presentation.
So, Chris, how do you find it emotionally? You build your baby, then you sell it, and 6 months later, gone. What was that process like? Are you enjoying? I call it this multi.
Yeah, it was emotional. You go through a bit of at least I did. I'm a pretty upbeat guy, as you can probably tell, but and so I'm used to running through walls, but I was leading a double life, like for that transition period where I was getting up and I was going to work, especially after the sale where they were clearly taking control and I was, being pushed to the side. It was very emotional. I would, try to, be happy, and the employees were not that happy about the transition. But so when I went home, I was depressed, and finally I couldn't wait. I had like the prison calendar sort of xed out in my in my head, right, of when I would get out. And I got out in end of January of 2020, and it was fine. I was burnt. I'd been working for like crazy, and the last 3 months before the sale, and then the new guys came in and they wanted me to run another marathon, which I really wasn't prepared to do, and the direction was they took it in different for me, but they're entitled. They're the new owners,
Right.
so yeah, it was very emotional because every inch of it. And the challenge that I had with, like, I was always somebody that wanted, like, I wanted a good culture because I could I had a company with bad culture. Like, I'd done one of the big pivots that I did during, to get to where I was I implemented, the Vern Harnish Rockefeller Habits playbook. And I had learned that through EO and MIT, the EO MIT program. And I was, notoriously lazy. I wouldn't read 60 books a year. I wanted to just read one and implement it. So that was the one that I chose, and I brought it back to my team. And anyway, that was the way we ran. There's a longer story to that I'm happy to get into, but ultimately that was the genesis between, AFMing our business and then building a proper culture and leading up to sale.
Yeah.
Chris, if you look at sort of your life now that you've created for yourself, and it's fascinating, right? Is there anything you would have done differently in the last couple of years? Like either picked one thing to focus on, or go to the beach, or some
Well,
focus, or whatever it is.
See, in a weird way, COVID forced me to indulge a lot of weird habits or weird things that I put off. So like when I had watching the market and watching COVID, I think like a lot of people were trying to figure out what the world was going to look like on the other side, if it was ever going to return, or we were going to. So I ended up buying some toys, like one does. One of the toys I enjoyed the most was my fishing boat. I just got a fishing boat, and I'm where we are in Montreal. We're on an island, so my marina is across the street, and just go fishing, and there's fish and there's bass, and it wasn't like a big yacht or anything like that. That just a fishing boat that I could take out by myself when I wanted to, and people would call me on for conference calls, and I would have my little background, and sometimes a fish would catch, and that would be fantastic. I kind of got bored of fishing, if you can believe it. And then last year was my first year where I got so busy that I literally put the boat in the water and took it out of the water, and there was nothing in between.
That was it.
So, and this year I'm trying to make sure that I don't go back to that level. But I have a degenerate gambling habit when it comes to startups. I enjoy it. I enjoy talking about business. I get calls from Y Combinator probably 3 or 4 a week. I can't take them all, but I try and I can't invest. I can't be on boards on 27 companies or anything like that. So but I love the energy of entrepreneurship. I love the energy of startups and having the blank page and just going through it and helping people. And it's something that I like I said, I do it for free because, and then somebody wants to pay me some options later on or whatever. I'm happy and I'm good to wait. But I just love business. I love helping people out. So many people helped me along the way, gave me advice, helped me with a little payroll to get over payroll at some point, and that's, I think there's a pay it forwardness that sort of comes from, sort of getting over that first hump. And clearly I'm not, there's so many people more wealthy and more successful than I am, but I think it sort of trickles down, right? And you don't get access always to the billionaires, so, or the 100 millionaires or the centimillionaires or whatever. You get access to guys who are just, 1 or 2 levels above. And if those guys are willing to help and drag you to a meeting or help or even attend a meeting and you see how, like, that's what my business partner was able to do. He was able to attend a meeting with gray hair, and my gray hair is more in my beard than the lack of hair. But ultimately, that's it. And that one meeting, that one deal, that one thing that sort of changes the economics for a business, and it goes from something that was about to fail to something that is now successful and moving and turning and I had a company. I had a company that came to me for money. It was 5 engineers. I remember this was about 4 years ago, and they asked me to put money in, and I told them no because you hadn't made an effort to make a single call and start do outbound calling. I said, here's what you're going to do. I said, all of you are going to do. I can't do a lot of math, but I want you to do 50 calls before you do anything else. And there's 5 of you, so I'm not an engineer, but to me that's 1,000 calls a week. Okay, 1,000. That's a lot. And they called me up and afterwards, and I asked them, great, did you do your 1,000 calls? And they said no, but I hung up on them. And so they called me back. I think we got disconnected. I said, no, we didn't get disconnected. You don't want to put in the effort. Click. Call me back a third time. I said, no, give us another chance. I said, guys, I'm not going to invest in you, but nobody's going to invest in you if you don't invest in yourself. So I said, listen, go do this. You won't need my money. You won't need anybody's money. But even if you do take money, you'll be worth 10x what you were today. So anyway, come back. They come back the week after. They've done the 1,000 calls. Well, guess what happens when you do the 1,000 calls?
You get business.
You get meetings. You get business. You get ideas. You get not money immediately, but it starts to get the machine working, right? 1,000 calls, all of a sudden the machine's working. All of a sudden, 3 weeks later, there's customers, there's revenue, there's all of the trickle down effects that happen from that discipline, right? You can't outsource that. You can't give it to some call center in the Philippines to sell for you, who doesn't know the business, doesn't know the industry, until you've figured that out. And that's the entrepreneurial training that most people want to skip over, especially if they're shy. If they're shy and they don't like rejection,
come naturally.
Yeah, but at some point, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, if you're going to be a CEO of a business, especially a founder, you got to get over that quick. Otherwise, you're toast. And I'm a big believer in the selling CEO. Like, you have to personally drag people kicking and screaming to your product. Get them to pay whatever they can afford, but get them to pay, right? And then do it again, and then do it again, and do it again, and do it again, and people tell me if they go to the gym often they lose weight. I'm clearly not that kind of person. I don't go to the gym that often. But in terms of the sales cycle, like, absolutely. This is a repeatable skill, and you can use AI as much as you want, and that helps amplify it. But at the beginning, people will buy from people, right? And they're not going to always buy from, and that you have to get through that initial inertia problem in most businesses. And I'm excited to help people, figure that product market fit out. And clearly, when I come in, I try and use the Gestalt approach, where it's like, all right, this has worked for me in the past. So, but I'll give you my ideas and my opinions, but they're opinions. The market votes with dollars is my message back, right? So, if somebody, if you've got your product market fit and people have willing to pay you money, great. Can you find a second person, that isn't your uncle or your aunt or your cousin?
Yeah.
Like, how do we build, like, it's okay that you use your ankle, your family connections at the beginning. We'll do whatever. You got to keep the lights on. But at some point, you have to create some kind of scalable or repeatable demand generation process. And so I want to build that in early in terms of the methodology, because that demand generation process or system or whatever it is really the value of the business. Because if it just relies on you and your ability to network or whatever, well, who's going to buy that business? Like I went through those 1-800-Chris years, right? And then I think every entrepreneur does, where you're the center of the universe and you feel like you're solving, world peace. But the reality is you're not really building value. You feel good because you're solving everybody's problems and you're fighting fires, but that's a very dangerous place to be, because that's where your burnout happens. That's where you're not delegating enough, and that's where you're not building, enterprise, any kind of value that somebody would want to pay for, because it's a you business, right?
Say all the stuff. My most important job as CEO of the company is to get myself fired.
Yeah. Firing myself was something I used. I used that line consistently. And listen, I'm dying for people to come in and laugh at the processes that I created, because I was never looking to build the perfect process. I was just looking to buy myself time. And so if buying myself time, it means I do it in Excel and not in Salesforce or whatever it is, fine, let's do it in Excel. Like, I don't need to track 10,000 leads. I need to track, 20. Right? So you don't need a CRM. Just kill it from your system. Kill it from your just done. Just, and so whatever you can do to sort of simplify your life, make it easy, and then and keep your spend low in the early days, because you want your money to go to where it's going to grow the business. Is it more,
That's
if
great.
you have $1,000, you're better off, where do you want to spend it? Right?
I'm having the best time, and I actually think when she launches, I'm going to put it on the podcast. But my daughter quit her job, and she's in the process of starting her own marketing-related business. And
good for her.
It's the sweetest thing. She's like, you learn all the limitations, but we see this in entrepreneurs all the time. Like, I made her brother her CFO. She has no idea. She didn't know what QuickBooks was. She doesn't know what accounting is. No idea about the money and the finance, and she's a highly creative type, right? But like,
I set up QuickBooks using Claude.
Yeah.
But
Using Claude?
my accountant was shocked. Yeah, I use Claude. I said, here's all my incorporation information. It's in a folder. I said, I created a QuickBooks for Online account. I said, here, you set up QuickBooks Online for me, and then make sure that my accountant has access. I did it while I was in conversation with my accountant. I said, listen, I can do all of this stuff. I can take my bank information, and I can put it all in, and like within 20 minutes, it was done. I don't need like 18 hours of accountant time.
But
and
you
so,
you got it. Like, she didn't even know she needed it. Okay.
Yeah, like that.
yes, yeah,
right.
That's a whole other.
That's different.
But for the creative ideas that she's coming up with and developing, her brother wouldn't know what the hell she was talking about. So
Yeah, but again, with these tools now, it's like it's okay. Create me the business. What do I need to run this business? What do I need to grow the business? What do I need to acquire customers? Like everybody has the greatest, for a couple $100 a month, effectively, that would be the max plan. But even for $20 a month, you've got the smartest business coaches in the world
crazy
in your hands. Like we have never seen a leveling of the playing field greater than what AI is able to do.
100%.
And so the opportunity for entrepreneurship is through the roof, as far as I'm concerned. Again, know your space, know what you're going to do, and but there is a massive churn of people and jobs and things that are going to happen that, my kids are are a little bit younger and they're sort of at that age where they're trying to figure stuff out. My daughter is much more on the entrepreneurship plan, so she just wants to take accounting and finance and just have a basic understanding. But she's starting her own business. It's not even a question. My son, who's more of the science type, doesn't quite know where this is going. Right? If he was going to go engineering or whatever, electrical engineer maybe, but I said, if you want to do that, get into battery technology, go into something that is growing for a long time. But the skills, the ability for people like me, instead of just talking and then having to hire a team like I did in the old days, like I literally have no more teams anymore. Like it's just me, it's subject matter expertise and Claude. And then Claude can build a lot of the infrastructure and a lot of the connections. It can identify who I should do business with. It can launch purchase orders. It can do all of the, if you have employees sitting and just interfacing with a computer, they're at risk for being replaced by
Of course
AI.
they are. Yes.
So it's really a dangerous place for the younger generation, which I don't know what the future is going to have. They need to be they need to think about how they're going to insert themselves into this new economy.
That's exactly right.
And for the
they
older
have
people,
to become subject matter experts. You just said it. How do you become a subject matter expert and then use the AI and not have a job where you're going to be replaced by it?
You really need to drive it properly. Like it's one thing, like I can create a contract, like, everyone's using it to run it. And legal profession is a perfect example where it's being, lawyer workload is being decimated because they're not doing a lot of the NDA, review the NDA, review the contract, like all of that stuff is now really, really good in AI. But again, I don't know what to look for. So sometimes, like the first draft, and as you use AI or these LLMs, is often not that great. I mean, it's getting better, but it's often not that great. So when you have a little subject matter expertise, you can realize, oh, it didn't do this or didn't catch this, and you can steer it a little bit better. And by the time you're at version 10 or 20, it's a phenomenal piece of literature. It's bang on. But if you don't have the skills or the knowledge, you just accept, version 1, right?
That's problematic.
So AI is I've been trying to tell people that this is happening for the last little bit, and I'm living proof. Like we had developers in one of the businesses that I invested in, and they got rid of the dev team.
Yeah,
it's all gone. And it's not because there's not smart people or not because they don't have value. It's just that AI has taken over in terms of being able to develop faster. What used to take weeks of development and reviews, you're talking like 20 minutes, 2 hours, and by the time you're talking about it, the next day it's done. So the pace of change, the pace of all this has gone up, but there's a lot of garbage that has been created, like very much like when AI builds everything, when AI does all your blogging, when AI does all your connecting on LinkedIn, what does that become? I'll just your AI should talk to my AI and get together and figure out, should we have a deal?
Where do people find you if they want to?
They can find me on LinkedIn. Easiest is Christopher Thierry.
Want to spell
or
that?
You can find me at Rated R Group or liquiddocs.ai or lensplus.ca. But
always fascinating to talk to you, my friend. Thank you for your time. I know it's valuable. So thank you so much.
No, I really appreciate it. And listen,
Thanks.
hopefully you'll cut me up and make me look good.
Thanks, man. Bye-bye.